Don't drink that. The voice cracked like a gunshot across the room. Every Hells Angels member froze. 4 weapons came out before the echo died. The most feared biker boss in Arizona. Cole Harrison stood with a glass halfway to his lips, staring at a terrified blonde woman in a worn jacket who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She wasn't looking at the guns pointed at her. She was looking at the drink in his hand like it was a grenade with the pin already pulled. If you've ever wondered what courage looks like when it has nothing left to lose, keep watching. Subscribe to our channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had been hammering the roof of the Lucky Spoon Diner for 3 hours straight, and nobody inside cared about the weather. Not tonight. The back section of the diner had been cleared 2 hours before closing. Booths pushed aside extra chairs, dragged in a long table set up with enough whiskey to drown a small army. 16 men filled those seats, and every single one of them wore leather with a winged skull stitched on the back. The laughter was loud. The handshakes were firm. The relief in the room was the kind that only comes after months of pressure finally lifting off a man's chest. Cole Harrison sat at the head of the table. He was 53 years old, built like someone who had never stopped working with his hands with gray, threaded through his dark hair, and a jaw that looked like it had been carved rather than grown. He had a scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone, and an old reminder of a night he never talked about. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they had the particular stillness of a man who had learned long ago that the most dangerous thing he could ever do was show panic. Cole Harrison did not panic. In 22 years, leading the Arizona chapter of the Hells Angels, he had survived 3 federal investigations, 2 assassination attempts, 1 prison sentence, and a decade of rivals who had tried everything they could think of to bring him down. Every single one of them had failed. Every single one of them had eventually stopped trying, either because they ran out of options or because they simply disappeared from the picture in ways that nobody asked too many questions about. Tonight was supposed to be clean. A new contract with Meridian Logistics had been finalized after 8 months of quiet negotiation. Legitimate work, clean money, a business arrangement that would keep 30 of his men employed and off the radar for the next 3 years. Cole had pushed hard for this deal. He wanted something his chapter could stand on without looking over their shoulders every night. He had men with kids now, men with wives, men who had been riding with him since they were 20 years old and who deserved something better than constantly waiting for the knock on the door. He raised his glass. The table raised their glasses with him. To getting it right, Cole said. His vice president, Derek Lawson, grinned from across the table. Derek was 47, lean and sharp-featured, with the kind of easy smile that made people trust him before they even finished shaking his hand. He had been riding with Cole for 15 years. He had stood beside him through things that would have broken other men. Cole trusted Derek the way he trusted his own heartbeat, automatically, completely, without ever stopping to think about whether that trust was still earned. To getting it right, Derek echoed and lifted his glass. Everyone drank. Cole brought the glass to his lips. Don't drink that. The voice hit the room like a fist. Every head turned, every hand dropped. 4 men were on their feet before the echo finished bouncing off the walls, and Cole's glass stopped an inch from his mouth. She was standing near the front entrance, half soaked from the rain outside, wearing a denim jacket that had seen better years and boots with the heel worn down on one side. She was young, maybe 28, maybe 30, with blonde hair pulled back in a way that suggested she hadn't been thinking about how she looked when she did it. She had a canvas bag slung over one shoulder that looked packed with everything she owned, and her eyes were locked on Cole's glass with the kind of focused terror that a person gets when they are watching something they already know the ending to. She didn't look like a threat. She looked like someone who had just sprinted through the rain to stop something terrible from happening. But in a room full of men who had built their survival on trusting their instincts before their logic, the distinction didn't matter. Marcus Webb, Cole's head of security, 240 pounds of muscle and controlled aggression, crossed the room in 4 steps and grabbed her by the arm. "You have about 3 seconds, Marcus said quietly, to give me a reason I shouldn't throw you through that door." She didn't fight the grip. She didn't look at Marcus. She looked at Cole. "That drink," she said, her voice shaking but her eyes steady. "Don't let him drink it, please." Tanner Reed, the club's enforcer, moved around the other side and put himself between her and the exit. 2 other men fanned out without being told. The room that had been full of celebration 30 seconds ago was now running on a completely different kind of electricity. Cole set the glass down slowly. He studied her the way he studied everything quietly from behind those storm cloud eyes, reading her without letting her read him. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Emily Carter." "That doesn't answer my question." "I was a waitress here tonight. I was working the floor when they came in before you did." Marcus tightened his grip. "Who's they?" Emily finally looked at him, then back at Cole. "Two men. I didn't know them. They came in about 40 minutes before your group arrived. They sat at the counter, they ordered coffee, they barely touched, and they were watching the staff the whole time. One of them went into the back area where the staff prepped drinks. He was back there for about 4 minutes. The room was completely still. Tanner's voice came from behind her. "And you're just now saying something." "I didn't know who they were watching," Emily said. "I didn't know what they were doing back there. I thought maybe they were checking on something. Then your group came in, and I saw them look at each other, and the way they looked..." She stopped. She swallowed. "I grew up watching my father work as a toxicologist. I know that look. When someone is watching for a reaction, not for trouble, they weren't worried. They were waiting." Cole picked up the glass again. "Not to drink, just to look at it." "She's lying," Tanner said flatly. "She's either the distraction or she's the plant. Either way, we're..." "Let her finish," Cole said. Tanner stopped. Emily looked at Cole directly. "The man who went into the back when he came out, he walked past me and I smelled something. Very faint, chemical, not cleaning supplies, something else. Something I recognized from years of working in laboratory environments." She took a breath. "I tried to find out which drink they had touched. I wasn't sure. Then I saw your glass being prepared, and I saw the server, not the regular server. Someone different carry it specifically to your seat, and I..." "What server?" Marcus interrupted. Emily glanced toward the back of the diner. "The one who brought the tray to this table, young, dark jacket, not a uniform." Marcus was already moving. He crossed the diner in seconds and disappeared through the kitchen door. They heard voices, then the sound of a door hitting a wall, then silence. Marcus came back 2 minutes later. His expression was enough. "Back door was open," he said. "Server's gone. Nobody on staff knows who he was. He showed up an hour ago, told the manager one of the regulars had called in sick. Manager assumed it was handled through the agency." The room contracted. Cole looked at the glass on the table. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Emily, still standing with Marcus's hand on her arm, still dripping from the rain, still watching him with those eyes that hadn't blinked enough since she walked in. "Sit down," he said. "Cole," Tanner started. "I said sit her down. At the table, get her some water." There was a half second of hesitation. In a room full of men who were used to acting on instinct, being told to sit down with the possible threat was counterintuitive in a way that made their skin crawl. But Cole's voice had that particular quiet weight that ended arguments before they formed, and nobody pushed it. Marcus released her arm. Emily sat. She kept both hands visible on the table. She understood, without needing it, explained that she was sitting in a room full of men who were making very fast calculations about whether she lived or died, and that the only currency she had was honesty. "Tell me exactly what you saw," Cole said. "From the beginning, every detail." Emily told him. She spoke carefully and without exaggeration. She described the two men at the counter, one heavy set with a short beard, one thin with a gray sweater, neither of them local looking. Both of them too calm for a diner at 9 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday night. She described the way the heavy-set one had excused himself toward the back, how she had clocked it as unusual but not alarming, how the thin one had kept watching the front door. She described the smell, faint antiseptic, with an undercurrent she recognized from years of working in rooms where chemicals were handled, with the kind of care that meant they were capable of serious harm. She described the substitute server appearing the way the drink had been placed precisely at Cole's seat. The table listened. When she finished, nobody spoke immediately. Then Derek Lawson leaned forward. "This is a story," Derek said pleasantly. "A very good story, but it's still a story." "Derek," Cole said, "I'm just pointing out that we have a woman who walked in off the street during a private meeting, interrupted our celebration, made an accusation without a shred of proof, and now we're all sitting here taking her word for it, like she's a reliable source." Derek's smile was even and unreadable. "All I'm saying is we should be logical about this." Emily looked at Derek. Something shifted very briefly in her expression, something that might have been recognition or something close to it, but she didn't say anything yet. Cole pulled the glass toward him. "If this is just whiskey," he said, "we'll know in about 10 minutes. He looked at Emily. "You said you worked in laboratory environments. What kind, like pharmaceutical research, chemical analysis? Then you know how to test something." Emily hesitated. "Without proper equipment. Use what's here. Kitchen, whatever you need." She looked at the glass. She thought for a moment. Then she said, "I need something acidic, lemon juice, vinegar, anything, and a white cloth or paper towel." Marcus was already moving. He came back with a sliced lemon from the kitchen and a stack of white napkins. Emily took the glass. She poured a small measure, barely a tablespoon, onto a folded napkin. Then she squeezed a few drops of lemon over it. The reaction was immediate. The liquid on the napkin darkened slightly at the edges. Not dramatically, not like a movie chemical. Just enough, a slight shift in color that shouldn't have happened with straight whiskey and citric acid, a faint separation where the compound resisted the acidic breakdown in a way that suggested it wasn't simply alcohol. Emily held the napkin up. The room looked at it. Derek made a sound of dismissal. "That could be anything. That could be the quality of the—" "Stop talking, Derek." Cole's voice was almost gentle. Derek stopped. Cole looked at Emily. "What does this tell you?" "It tells me there's a compound in this drink that reacts to acid." Emily kept her voice measured and clinical. "That shouldn't happen with standard alcohol. It tells me that whatever was added was designed to be undetectable to taste and smell at normal consumption, but that it's chemically active in the presence of certain other compounds." She paused. "The question is what triggers it. You said someone studied my medical history." Cole's voice was flat. "How do you know that?" Emily met his eyes. And here was the moment she had been building toward the moment she had been carrying for 8 months, the weight of it pressing on her chest every single day since she lost everything for knowing something she couldn't unknow. Because she said, "This isn't the first time I've seen this formula." The silence in the room was absolute. "I've seen it designed," she said. "I know who designed it. I know what it does. And I know exactly which specific heart medication it was paired with to make someone's death look like a cardiac event that no standard autopsy would flag as anything other than natural." She held Cole's gaze without blinking. "I know all of this because 8 months ago, I was the analyst who discovered it by accident. And when I tried to report it, they destroyed my career, my reputation, and very nearly my life. The people who created this formula have been eliminating anyone who could expose them, and apparently now your name is on that list." The rain hammered the roof. Tanner spoke first. "Who's they?" Emily took a breath. "A man named Victor Reynolds. He runs a pharmaceutical research company called Westbridge. On paper, they develop medical compounds for chronic illness treatment. In the practice I accidentally stumbled into, they've been using those same research facilities to develop a very different kind of product." She paused. "Compounds that kill specific people without leaving evidence. Custom built to interact with whatever medications the target already takes. No poison, no obvious trauma. Just a person who was alive in the morning and dead by the afternoon with a cardiac report that says their heart simply gave out." The table was silent in the way that rooms get silent when something has shifted fundamentally and everyone present knows it. "You said my name is on that list?" Cole said. "Why," Emily looked at him steadily, "because someone who knows your medical history gave it to them." That landed differently than anything else she had said. Cole didn't move, but something in his face shifted very slightly, very quietly, and the men who had known him for years recognized it. Not anger, something colder than anger. "How long have you known?" he asked. "About you specifically, 2 weeks. I recognized you when you came into the diner a few nights ago. I'd seen your name in a file connected to Victor's operation months before everything happened to me. I didn't know what the connection was at the time. I've been trying to figure out whether to approach you since then, and I couldn't figure out how to do it safely." She let that sit for a moment. "Tonight wasn't my plan. Tonight just happened, and I didn't have time to think about it." "What were you going to do if it wasn't tonight?" Marcus asked from behind her. "I don't know," Emily said. "I've been figuring things out one day at a time for 8 months. I don't have a plan. I barely have a place to sleep." She said it without self-pity. Just facts. What I have is the truth. I've had it the whole time. And nobody has been willing to listen to it, so I stopped trying to convince anyone and started trying to survive long enough for it to matter. Tanner walked around the table and stood at the edge of Emily's line of sight. If you've known about us for 2 weeks, why didn't you go to the police? The table actually laughed at that brief, involuntary tight with dark humor. Emily didn't laugh. Because I already tried to go to the authorities 8 months ago. I had evidence. I had documentation. I had a chemical analysis that showed exactly what Westbridge was producing and what it was designed to do. She paused. It disappeared. My supervisor destroyed my report before it went anywhere. 2 weeks later, I was out of the industry entirely. My professional reputation was shredded by allegations that were completely false, and I found out that the authorities I had tried to contact had received a very different version of my story from very well-connected people. Victor Aslanol's has reach, Derek said quietly. Cole turned his head and looked at Derek. Derek shrugged. I'm just saying, if she's telling the truth, Cole said. Something crossed Derek's face. Just for a moment, something very small and very fast there and gone before most people in the room could register it. But Cole was watching, and Cole noticed. Pull the security footage from the last 2 hours, Cole said to Marcus. I want to see those 2 men from the counter. I want their faces, and I want them run through every database we have access to tonight. Marcus nodded and moved. Tanner, I want the kitchen staff verified, and I want to know exactly how that server got in here and who told the manager he was legitimate. Go. Tanner went. Cole looked back at Emily. She was still sitting with her hands on the table, still watching him with eyes that had a specific quality he had encountered very rarely in his life. The particular look of someone who had been through enough that they'd stopped being afraid of the things most people were afraid of and had replaced that fear with something harder and quieter and much more sustainable. The file that mentioned my name, Cole said. Do you still have it? Parts of it, Emily said. I kept copies, not everything. They took most of what I had, but I kept the pieces that mattered most. We're somewhere safe. Cole almost smiled. In this room, at this table, there is nobody more interested in keeping you alive right now than I am. You understand that, yes. So, somewhere safe isn't an answer I'm going to work with. Emily looked at him for a long moment. This was the calculation, the one she had been running through since the moment she shouted across the diner and committed herself to this path. Trust was a dangerous currency. She had learned that in the hardest way possible. But she was sitting across from a man who had just been told that someone inside his own circle had handed his medical history to a person who wanted him dead. And the particular stillness behind his eyes told her something she hadn't expected. He already suspected someone. He wasn't starting from zero. He was starting from a name he already half knew, and he was watching the people in this room the way she had watched the men at the counter, quietly tracking, waiting for confirmation. I have a storage unit, she said. Off Route 51, I can take you there. Cole nodded once. We go tonight. Cole. Derek's voice was measured, reasonable, careful. We should think about this. We don't know this woman. We don't know if what she's saying is accurate or if this is some kind of setup designed to get you out of a secured location and into an exposed one. Cole reached across the table and picked up the glass. He held it out to Derek. Prove me wrong, he said quietly. Drink it. Derek stared at the glass. The entire table stared at Derek. 3 seconds passed. That's what I thought, Cole said and set the glass back down. He stood up, and 12 years of quiet command came with him, filling the room without effort. We move in 20 minutes, he said. Marcus, Tanner, and Rafe come with me. Everyone else stays here, locks this place down. Nobody goes anywhere until I call. He looked at Emily. You ride with Marcus. Emily stood. Her legs were steadier than she expected them to be. She had been running on adrenaline and terror for the last 15 minutes, and somewhere under that there was a trembling exhaustion that she had been holding back through sheer will. But something else was rising through it now, something she hadn't felt in 8 months. The sense that something was finally moving in the right direction. Cole moved toward the door, and his men fell into position around him, the way water moves around a stone automatically, fluidly, without needing instruction. Derek watched Cole's back, and Emily, walking toward the door with Marcus at her shoulder, glanced back at Derek just once. His expression was controlled and pleasant and gave nothing away. But his hands pressed flat on the table were very slightly too still. Emily had spent years learning to read the difference between someone who was comfortable and someone who was working very hard to appear comfortable. She turned back toward the door. She didn't say anything yet, but she filed it away in that part of her mind that she had been living inside for 8 months, the part that cataloged things other people missed, that tracked patterns and inconsistencies, and the small tells that preceded large disasters. The rain was still coming down when they stepped outside. Cole didn't put his jacket up against it. He just walked through it like it wasn't there, like the weather was irrelevant to whatever calculation was happening behind those quiet eyes. Emily fell into step. Marcus stayed close. Somewhere behind them, inside the diner, Derek Lawson picked up his phone. He turned away from the remaining men at the table. He typed a message. 3 words. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and turned around with that easy, familiar smile that had taken him 15 years to perfect. And the night moved forward into whatever it was always going to become. Marcus drove with both hands on the wheel and said almost nothing the entire way to Route 51, which suited Emily fine because she had spent the last 20 minutes trying to slow her heartbeat down to something that didn't feel like it was going to crack through her rib cage. Cole sat in the front passenger seat. He hadn't spoken since they left the diner parking lot. He was looking straight ahead through the rain-streaked windshield, and Emily had the distinct impression that he wasn't watching the road he was running. Something in his head, turning it over and over, checking it from every angle, the way a man checks a structure he's about to put his weight on. Tanner and Ray followed in a second vehicle 10 yards back. Emily sat behind Marcus and watched the side mirror. She had been watching side mirrors for 8 months. It was a habit she'd developed during the first weeks after she lost her job, when she still believed that if someone was coming for her, they would at least be obvious about it. She knew better now. The people who came for you quietly were far more dangerous than the ones who announced themselves. The compound you described, Cole said without turning around. The one in that drink. How specific is it? Very specific, Emily said. That's what made it remarkable when I first found it. Standard toxic compounds operate on broad biological systems. They disrupt organ function. Generally, they interfere with neurological processes in ways that can affect almost anyone. What Westbridge developed was different. They designed something that required a very precise biological environment to activate, meaning it was inert in almost everyone who encountered it. But when it combined with a specific class of medication, beta blockers, Cole said. Emily went still. I've been on them for 4 years, he said. Mild cardiac arrhythmia. Not serious. Under control. Almost nobody outside my doctor knows about it. Almost nobody, Emily repeated. Cole said nothing. Marcus kept driving. Emily looked at the mirror again. The second vehicle was still there, steady in the rain. She had been tracking the other cars on the road too since they left the diner, neither of them following the turns. The file I saw, Emily said carefully, the one that mentioned your name, it wasn't attached to you as a target, not at that point. It was attached to your medical records as a data point. Someone had pulled your prescription history and flagged you as a person of interest in relation to a separate transaction. What kind of transaction? A financial one, a large movement of money through a series of shell accounts that Westbridge used to fund their covert research farm. Your name appeared on a document that connected one of those accounts to a business arrangement. She paused. I didn't understand the connection at the time. I only understood that your name shouldn't have been in that file. You kept that page. Yes. Cole finally turned around. He looked at her directly for the first time since they'd gotten in the vehicle, and she understood then why people described his gaze the way they did. It wasn't threatening. It was simply total. He gave his full attention the way most people gave their peripheral attention, and being on the receiving end of it was like being held in place. Emily, he said, who else have you told any of this to? No one who's still in a position to do anything about it. What does that mean? It means I told 2 people. One was my supervisor, Victor Reynolds, who destroyed the evidence and arranged my termination. The other was a federal contact I had developed through my work, a compliance officer at the FDA, who I trusted. She paused. He stopped returning my calls 3 weeks after our last conversation. I found out later he'd been transferred to a desk position in a field office in Montana. Lateral move with no explanation given. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Victor Reynolds has been doing this a long time, Emily said. He doesn't eliminate people. That would attract attention. He relocates them, sidelines them, buries them in circumstances that make it look like professional failure or personal instability. He's very good at it. She looked at Cole. You're different, Ed. You're not someone he can sideline. Which is why he went straight to the drink, Cole said. Yes. They rode in silence for a moment. Then Tanner's voice came through on the radio clipped to Marcus's belt. Vehicle behind us has been consistent since the interchange. Two-door, running without lights. Marcus looked in the rearview. I see it. Cole reached forward and picked up the radio. Don't speed up. Take the next right, go 3 blocks, come back to the main road. Copy. The vehicles turned. The 2 doors stayed on the main road. Emily hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath until she let it out. False alarm, Marcus said. There are no false alarms, Cole said and put the radio down. They reached the storage facility 8 minutes later. It was the kind of place that existed without drawing attention to itself. A grid of identical orange-doored units behind a chain-link fence, lit by a single working floodlight. The kind of place where people kept things they needed to access occasionally but didn't want in their homes. Emily had rented the unit under a name that wasn't hers. She had learned that particular trick from a woman she'd met in a shelter 3 months after losing her apartment, a woman who had escaped a domestic situation so methodically constructed against her that she'd had to rebuild her entire life from nothing piece by piece in the spaces between what the official world could track. That woman had taught Emily more about practical survival in one conversation than 8 years of professional education had taught her about protecting herself. Emily keyed in the code and pulled up the door. The unit held 2 plastic bins, a folding chair, a battery-powered lamp, and a small lockbox. She pulled the lockbox out and opened it. Inside were 11 pages of documents printed on cheap paper from a library computer, each one a fragment of what had once been a much larger record. 7 USB drives, a photograph, and a sealed evidence bag containing a small glass vial. Cole looked at the vial. What's that? A sample, Emily said. From the compound I discovered at Westbridge. I removed it during the inspection before Victor destroyed everything else. It's sealed, stable. She held it up. This is what they spent 4 years developing. This is the proof that the compound exists. Marcus reached for it instinctively. Don't, Emily said. The seal has to stay intact. If the chain of evidence is broken, it becomes useless in any legal proceeding. Marcus pulled his hand back. Cole crouched down and looked at the pages in the lockbox. He picked up the one on top, scanned it, put it back down, picked up the next one. He worked through them methodically and quickly, and Emily watched his face as he read. He had the reading face of a man who had spent his life processing information under pressure. No visible reaction, just absorption. Each page filed away and connected to the ones before it in a running architecture that she could almost watch being constructed behind his eyes. He stopped on the 7th page. He looked at it for longer than the others. Then he held it up and looked at Emily. This account number, he said, the one in the column on the right. That's the Shell account I mentioned, the one your name was connected to. I've seen this number before, Cole said. Emily waited. Cole set the page down carefully the way you set something down when you want to make absolutely sure it doesn't move. He stood up slowly. He was very still in the way that Emily had come to recognize in the last 2 hours, the stillness of a man whose interior temperature was rising, while his exterior stayed controlled. Marcus, he said, pull up the Meridian contract files, the financial routing. Marcus looked at him. You want me to do that here? Right now. Marcus pulled out his phone. He worked through a series of access confirmations, navigated to something, and then held the screen out to Cole. Cole looked at it. He looked at the page in the lockbox. He looked at the phone again. Son of a bitch, he said quietly. Marcus looked over his shoulder at the phone. What am I looking at? The routing account for the Meridian deal, Cole said. The one Derek handled. The one he told me was set up through the new financial services contact in Tucson. He tapped the page. This number, last 4 digits, it's the same account. The storage unit went very quiet. Emily had known for 8 months that the financial connection existed. She hadn't known where it led. She had a name in a document, and a number in a column, and a conviction that they were connected to something larger, but she hadn't had the inside knowledge to close the loop. She was looking at it close now, right in front of her. Cole Harrison was closing the loop in real time with his own access, with his own history. And the expression on his face was not the expression of a man making a discovery. It was the expression of a man confirming something he had already half known. How long? Marcus said. I don't know yet. Cole, Marcus's voice dropped. How long have you suspected? Cole looked at him. There were things in the Meridian negotiation that didn't track. Meetings I wasn't told about until after they happened. Information that showed up on the other side of the table that shouldn't have been available to them. He paused. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself I was being paranoid. Derek has been with me 15 years, and 15 years doesn't get written off on paranoia. He picked up the page again. I was wrong. Emily looked at the photograph still in the lockbox. She hesitated, then picked it up and held it out to Cole. He took it. It showed two men standing outside a building she recognized as the main Westbridge research facility. One of them was Victor Reynolds. She'd identified him from press photos, a polished man in a good suit with the particular confidence of someone who had never spent a day worrying about whether his version of events would be believed. The other man was someone she didn't recognize. Cole did. She could tell from the way he stopped breathing for exactly 2 seconds. That's Derek, Cole said. I didn't know who he was when I found this photograph, Emily said. I kept it because Victor Reynolds was in it, and I was keeping everything connected to Westbridge. I didn't know the other man's identity until tonight when I looked across that table and recognized his face. Cole handed the photograph to Marcus without a word. Marcus looked at it, his jaw set. He handed it back to Cole without a word either. Sometimes the things that needed to be said between men who had known each other a long time were said in exactly that kind of silence. There's something else, Emily said. Both men looked at her. She reached into the bin beneath the lockbox and pulled out a folded piece of paper that she hadn't put in the box with the rest. This one she'd kept separate deliberately because it was the piece that frightened her most, not because of what it proved, but because of what it suggested about the scale of what Victor Reynolds was doing. She unfolded it and laid it flat on top of the bin. It was a list of names, 14 of them, some with check marks beside them. Cole scanned it. 3 of the names he clearly recognized. His expression shifted in small but readable ways on each one. One of the checkmark names made him close his eyes for exactly 1 second. Reggie Hawthorne, he said. He died 8 months ago. Heart failure. He was 49 years old, had no prior cardiac history, and every single person who knew him said he seemed completely healthy the week before. Yes, Emily said. Was he on medication? I found a prescription record for him connected to the same pharmacy data Westbridge was accessing. He was on a calcium channel blocker for blood pressure. Marcus sat down on a plastic bin. He was a man who processed things physically. Emily had noticed that in the diner, the way he moved when his thinking changed. Sitting down was a significant gesture. They've been doing this for a while, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. At least 2 years, Emily said, possibly longer. The documentation I have covers 2 years. The compound development timeline started before that. Cole folded the list and put it in his jacket pocket. Emily almost said something, almost explained that those documents were evidence and should be preserved properly, and then stopped herself because this was not a courtroom, and Cole Harrison was not a prosecutor, and the rules that governed what she'd spent her career doing simply did not apply to where she was standing right now. What does Reynolds want from this? Tanner said from the doorway. He had been standing there quietly since they arrived, listening without inserting himself, which Emily was learning was his particular skill. Money is the obvious answer, Emily said, but I think it's more than that. Westbridge is genuinely profitable on its legitimate side. Victor Reynolds doesn't need money in the traditional sense. What he needs is control. He's built a parallel business that gives him leverage over people who can't be bought or threatened through conventional means. If you have someone's medical history, and you know what medication they take, and you have access to something that can work with that medication to kill them cleanly. She paused. You're not in the drug business anymore. You're in the insurance business. You're ensuring your own position by holding everyone else's life in your hands. Tanner was quiet for a moment. And Derek gets paid, Cole said. Derek gets access to business arrangements he couldn't reach on his own. And probably Derek gets to keep breathing, which is its own form of payment when the alternative is on the table. He picked up the sealed vial from the lockbox and looked at it. You said this is stable. Yes. And you said the chain of evidence has to stay intact. For any legal proceeding, yes. Cole looked at her. I need someone I trust to have this analyzed independently, not through official channels. Not yet. I have someone, Emily said. Before he could ask, she continued. Her name is Dr. Patricia Shen. She was a colleague of mine at Westbridge before Victor dismantled her department. She left voluntarily when she saw what was happening, and Victor's people left her alone because her departure served the narrative that the department was being downsized, not dismantled. She's been working at a private laboratory in Scottsdale for the last year. Emily paused. I've been afraid to contact her because I didn't know if reaching out would put her at risk. But she's the only person I know with the equipment and the expertise to confirm what this is. Can you reach her tonight? I don't know. Maybe. Cole handed the vial back to Emily. Try. She pulled out a phone, a prepaid one, the third she'd used in 8 months, and found Patricia's number. She had memorized it rather than store it. Old habit, new necessity. It rang 4 times. Emily was already composing the voicemail in her head when the line connected. Hello, Patricia Shen's voice was cautious in the way voices get when an unknown number calls after midnight. Pat? Emily kept her voice low and even. It's Emily Carter. A pause, a long one. Emily. Patricia's voice shifted not to warmth exactly, but to something careful and alert. Where are you? Safe, right now safe. I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. I'm always honest with you. Has anyone from Westbridge contacted you in the last year? Anyone asking about me or about the compound analysis work I was doing before I left? Another pause. This one told Emily everything. Pat, once, Patricia said, about 4 months ago, someone called the lab, said they were doing a reference check for a position you'd applied for. I told them I couldn't discuss former colleagues and ended the call. Did they give a name? Reynolds? Emily closed her eyes. Emily, what is happening? I can't explain everything right now, but I need your help with something critical. I have a sample that needs independent chemical analysis. Clean chain of evidence. Not traceable back to either of us until we're ready. Ready for what? Emily looked at Cole. He was watching her with those quiet eyes giving nothing away, waiting. Ready to use it, Emily said. Silence on the line. Then how soon do you need it? Tomorrow morning if possible. Bring it to the lab at 7. I'll come in early. Don't call ahead again from this number. A beat. And Emily? Yes. I'm glad you're still alive. Emily ended the call. She looked at Cole. 7 a.m., she said. Cole nodded. He turned to Marcus. Drive her to wherever she's staying. Stay with her tonight. Nobody goes anywhere alone until I know exactly what we're dealing with and who else is involved. And Derek? Marcus asked. Cole was quiet for a moment. Derek comes to the morning meeting at 9, he said. Same as always. I don't want him knowing anything has changed before I'm ready. He's going to reach out to Reynolds tonight, Tanner said. If he texted them when we left the diner. He already did, Cole said. I watched him do it. He turned away from the table and put the phone back before anyone except me was looking at him. He paused. Let him think his message landed. Let Reynolds think the plan is still on track. I want them comfortable until I'm not. Emily looked at Cole and felt something she hadn't felt in the direction of another person in a very long time. Not gratitude exactly. Gratitude was what you felt when someone was kind to you. This was different. This was the recognition of someone who operated on the same frequency, who understood that information was the only real weapon and that the timing of its use was everything. What about tonight? Emily asked. If Reynolds knows the drink didn't work. Reynolds knows the drink didn't work, Cole said. Derek told him, which means Reynolds knows there's a loose variable, which means he's going to be very busy tonight, making sure his exposure is contained, and he's going to be spending zero time thinking about what we're doing, because as far as Derek knows, we left that diner with you as a person of interest and no real information. He looked at her directly. You never told Derek what you have in that box, correct? I never told anyone in that room except you. Good. Cole looked at the lockbox. Pack it up. Bring all of it. Emily repacked the box. Her hands were steadier now than they had been in the diner, steadier than they had been since she first recognized Cole Harrison across a diner counter 2 weeks ago and understood that she was standing at the intersection of everything she'd been running from and the only path through it. She picked up the photograph before she closed the box. Victor Reynolds, Derek Lawson, 2 men standing outside a building where people had spent years designing invisible ways to kill. She had carried this photograph for 8 months. She had carried it through losing her career and her apartment and her sense of who she was in the world. She had carried it through nights in shelters and weeks in cheap motels, in the particular grinding loneliness of knowing something terrible and having no one willing to believe you. She had carried it to a diner in Phoenix in the rain, and she had shouted across a room full of armed men, and here she was. She put the photograph back in the box and closed it. Marcus took the box from her with a gentleness that surprised her. Cole moved toward the storage unit door, and as he passed Emily, he stopped for exactly 1 second. He didn't say anything. He looked at her the way people look at someone who has done something that cost them more than anyone watching could calculate. Then he walked out into the rain, and Emily picked up her canvas bag and followed him, and for the first time in 8 months, she was walking towards something instead of away from it. Behind them in a corner office at Westbridge Pharmaceutical Research, Victor Reynolds read the message Derek had sent and set his phone down on the desk. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop and began making calls, because the woman who had gotten away from him 8 months ago had just surfaced, and she was standing next to the one man in Arizona that Victor had not yet figured out how to control. That was a problem, and Victor Reynolds was very, very good at solving problems. Victor Reynolds did not sleep that night. He sat in his office with the lights low and his phone face up on the desk and worked through the problem the way he worked through every problem, methodically, without panic, stripping each variable down to its essential risk and assigning it a response. Panic was for people who hadn't prepared. Victor had been preparing for contingencies since the day he first understood that the world rewarded people who controlled information more than it rewarded people who simply possessed it. The Emily Carter variable had resurfaced. That was manageable. What was less manageable was the company she was keeping. Derek's message had been 3 words: plan is compromised. Victor had read it, set the phone down, and spent the next 4 minutes sitting completely still while he reconstructed the evening from what he knew. The compound had been placed correctly. The server had been extracted cleanly. The fact that the plan was compromised meant either the compound had been identified before consumption or someone had intervened. Given that Emily Carter had been working at that diner for 2 weeks of detail, Victor's surveillance team had flagged but not acted on quickly enough. The answer was obvious. She had warned him. She had walked into a room full of Hell's Angels and warned Cole Harrison. Victor turned that fact over several times. Most people, given 8 months of running and hiding, given everything they had lost and everything they feared, would not walk into that room. They would stay invisible. They would protect themselves first. The fact that Emily Carter had not done that told Victor something important about her that he should have calculated more carefully 8 months ago. She wasn't protecting herself. She was still trying to stop him. That made her significantly more dangerous than someone who was simply scared. He picked up the phone and called the one number he kept off every documented contact list. It rang twice. "We have a complication," Victor said when the line connected. The voice on the other end was unhurried. "How large?" "Carter has surfaced. She's with Harrison. I don't know what she's given him yet, but she's been in possession of partial documentation for 8 months, and she's had 2 weeks to observe the operation." A pause. "What do you need?" "I need to know what she kept. I need to know what Harrison knows. And I need both of those answers before 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." "That's a narrow window." "I'm aware." Victor looked at the window. "Derek is still in position. He doesn't know how much Harrison suspects. Use that." The line went quiet for a moment. And Carter herself, Victor considered it. "She's no longer a sidelining situation," he said. "She's become something else." He ended the call. He sat for another moment in the quiet of his office, thinking about Emily Carter, the young analyst who had walked into a routine quality inspection and noticed something that 14 other analysts had walked past without seeing. He had underestimated her capacity for persistence. He would not make that mistake twice. He opened his laptop and began to work. Emily didn't sleep either. Marcus had taken her to a motel 3 miles from the storage unit, one of the club's properties, clean and anonymous, with a deadbolt that actually worked and a window she instinctively checked twice before she sat down on the edge of the bed. Marcus parked outside and stayed in the vehicle. She could see the outline of him through the curtain, and the particular comfort of knowing someone was outside who had a reason to keep her alive was not lost on her. She sat with a lockbox on her knees and went through the documents again. She had read them so many times in the last 8 months that she could recite certain pages from memory, but tonight she was reading them differently, reading them through the framework of what Cole had told her through the specific detail of Derek Lawson's name and the account number that connected the Meridian contract to Westbridge's Shell network. New information changed what old information meant. She had learned that in the laboratory years before she learned it the hard way in the rest of her life. She stopped on the page with the financial routing. There was a reference number in the margin that she had circled 8 months ago and then never been able to trace. At the time, she had hit a wall without access to Westbridge's internal systems, without the kind of inside knowledge that came from being part of the operation, rather than observing it from outside. The reference number was just a number. Now she looked at it again. And she thought about what Cole had said about meetings he hadn't been told about. Information showing up on the other side of the negotiating table. The particular texture of betrayal that came not from a single act, but from a long pattern of small compromises that accumulated into something enormous. She pulled out her prepaid phone. She hesitated. Then she typed a message to the number Cole had given her before they separated. Just the reference number. Nothing else. His response came back in 4 minutes. One word confirmed. Emily set the phone down. The reference number was an internal Westbridge authorization code. Cole had matched it to something inside the Meridian documentation, which meant that Derek hadn't just passed information to Victor Reynolds. Derek had actively channeled the Meridian deal through Westbridge's financial infrastructure. The legitimate business Cole had spent 8 months building as a clean foundation for his chapter's future had been routed without his knowledge through the same network that funded invisible assassinations. She lay back on the bed without taking off her shoes and stared at the ceiling. Her brother Noah's face came to her in the way it always did when she was very tired. Clear and uncomplicated, the way he looked when he was 12 and she was 18, and their mother had just gotten sick for the first time, and Emily had sat on the edge of his bed and told him that everything was going to be okay in a tone of voice that was more conviction than certainty. She had always been better at projecting certainty than she had any right to. It was the same quality that had walked her through a room full of armed men 3 hours ago and kept her voice steady while 4 guns were pointed in her direction. She just had to keep projecting it a little longer. She closed her eyes and made herself rest, if not sleep, because tomorrow at 7 a.m., she was meeting Patricia Shen, and whatever happened after that was going to require everything she had. Cole Harrison did not go home. He drove to the chapter's garage, a legitimate auto repair business that also served as the club's primary meeting space, and spent the hours between 2 and 5 in the morning doing something that looked from the outside like nothing at all. He sat at the workbench with a cup of coffee that went cold. He made 4 phone calls. He looked at 3 documents on his phone and then put the phone face down. What he was actually doing was the hardest kind of thinking, the kind that required dismantling something you'd built your life around and examining every piece of it to see what was actually real. 15 years. He and Derek had ridden through things together that would have ended most partnerships. A federal investigation in 2014 that got within 2 steps of a serious indictment before the evidence collapsed. A territorial conflict in 2017 that required the kind of decisions Cole didn't discuss, and Derek had stood beside him through every one of them. The night Cole's younger brother Mitch had been killed in a road accident on the interstate, and Derek had driven 4 hours to sit with him in a hospital waiting room without being asked. Cole had believed in Derek the way you believe in something that's been tested. The problem with tests he was understanding now was that they only measured what they measured. They didn't measure the things happening in the margins, the quiet negotiations, the small agreements, the incremental movement of loyalty from one place to another that happened so gradually that by the time you could see it, it had already been going on for years. He picked up the coffee, drank it cold. Tanner came in at 4:30 and sat down across from him without saying anything. That was one of the things Cole valued most about Tanner. The man understood that silence was sometimes the most useful thing you could offer. They sat together for a few minutes. Then Cole said, "How many of the men knew about my medication?" Tanner thought about it. Doc Harrigan, obviously, Marcus, me, Derek. He paused. And whoever Derek told. That's what I came up with too. Do you want me to reach out to Harrigan tonight? No, I don't want anyone reached out to tonight. I want Derek to wake up tomorrow and walk into the 9 o'clock meeting believing that last night was a failed operation from someone else's playbook and that I'm shaken but no closer to understanding where it came from. Cole set the coffee down. I want him to feel safe. Tanner looked at him. And then I want him to stand in front of every man in this chapter and answer for what he did. Not in private, not quietly. Cole's voice was level and without heat, which was how he sounded when he was most serious. Every one of my men trusted him the same way I did. They deserve to look him in the face when the truth comes out. Tanner nodded slowly. Cole, he said it carefully. If Reynolds is moving tonight, if he knows the operation failed and Carter is with us, he's not going to wait for 9 a.m. No, Cole agreed. He's not, which means he's going to move through Derek. Yes. So Derek is going to get instructions tonight or early morning, and those instructions are going to tell him to do something at that 9 o'clock meeting. That's my read. Tanner was quiet for a moment. What do you think it is? Cole looked at the workbench. I think Reynolds is going to want to solve 2 problems at once. Emily and me. And Derek is the only instrument he has that's positioned inside our operation. He paused. I think Derek is going to walk into that meeting tomorrow morning with something he's been given by Reynolds, and I think he's going to believe he still has the advantage. And does he know we have the documentation Emily brought? Derek knows Emily was at the diner. He knows I chose not to throw her out. He knows we left together. Cole's expression was unreadable, but he doesn't know about the storage unit. He doesn't know what she's been carrying for 8 months, and he doesn't know that I matched his account number to the Meridian routing. He picked up the phone and turned it over in his hand. He texted Reynolds that the plan was compromised. He didn't tell Reynolds what we know because he doesn't know what we know. That's our window, Tanner said. That's our window, Cole agreed. At 6:58 in the morning, Emily walked into a private laboratory in Scottsdale with the sealed vial in her jacket pocket and Marcus 2 steps behind her. Patricia Shen was already there. She was a small, precise woman in her mid-40s with short, dark hair and the kind of focused efficiency that Emily had always admired, the quality of someone who understood that careful work done correctly was always faster than fast work done wrong. She had been Emily's closest professional ally at Westbridge, and looking at her now across a lab that was significantly smaller and less equipped than what they'd both worked with before, Emily felt the weight of everything Victor Reynolds had cost the people around her, not just herself. Patricia looked at Marcus. He needs to wait outside. Marcus looked at Emily. Emily nodded. Please. Marcus went outside without arguing, which Emily noted as another data point about the kind of discipline Cole Harrison cultivated in his people. Patricia locked the door. She turned to Emily and, for one moment, her professional composure slipped just enough to show what was underneath genuine relief and genuine fear, and the particular complex emotion of someone who had been wondering for months whether a person they cared about was still alive. You look terrible, Patricia said. I know. Are you eating sometimes? Patricia exhaled. Okay. She pulled herself back together the way Emily had watched her do in tense lab situations 100 times. Show me what you have. Emily put the vial on the table. Patricia looked at it without touching it. She leaned forward, studied the seal, the label Emily had written in her own handwriting 8 months ago, the color of the compound inside. Her expression shifted from careful to deeply serious. This is the compound from the Q7 batch, Patricia said. Emily went still. You know it. I recognized the formulation structure when I started seeing anomalies in the research logs about 2 weeks before I left. Patricia straightened. I didn't have what you have. I didn't have a sample, but I saw the research direction and I reported it internally to my department head, and my department head told me the work was within approved parameters. She looked at Emily. 3 days later, my department was eliminated and I was offered a voluntary separation package. You never told me, Emily said. You were already gone by the time I understood what I was seeing, and I was afraid. Patricia said it plainly without excuse. I was afraid in a way that I am not proud of. I had been watching what happened to you, and I made a calculation about my own survival, and I took the package, and I left. She held Emily's gaze. I'm sorry. Don't be, Emily said. You're here now. Patricia picked up the vial with gloved hands and moved to the analysis station. How long do I have? We need preliminary confirmation by 8:30. Patricia looked at the clock. That's tight. I know. You'll have it. She began setting up the equipment. Tell me what you need me to confirm. Emily leaned against the counter. I need confirmation that this compound is chemically inert in isolation, but becomes biologically active when introduced to a system already processing a beta blocker, specifically metoprolol. And I need confirmation that the activated compound produces a cardiac event that would register on a standard autopsy as arrhythmia-induced heart failure with no toxicological flags. Patricia's hands paused briefly over the equipment. Emily, she said, and if I confirm that, I know what it means. It means this was used, not just developed, used. I know, Emily said. That's why it needs to be on record. Patricia looked at her for a moment, and whatever she was processing moved through her quickly and quietly and settled into the particular resolution that Emily recognized as someone deciding that the cost of doing something necessary was worth paying. Start the timer, Patricia said and went to work. At 8:47, Emily's phone buzzed. Cole Reynolds called Derek at 5 a.m. We have the recording. Get back here. She read it twice. Then she looked at Patricia, who was still working, and said, how close? 4 minutes, Patricia said without looking up. Emily stood by the door and watched the clock. At 8:51, Patricia set down her instruments, pulled off her gloves, and turned around. Her face said everything before her words did. It's exactly what you said it was, Patricia told her. The compound is inert in isolation. In the presence of metoprolol, it produces a cascade reaction that presents identically to hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and failure. Standard tox screens won't flag it. You'd need a specific panel targeting this compound class, and nobody runs that panel on a cardiac case without prior suspicion. She took a breath. I can document this, formally, under my professional credentials. Full chain of evidence. You understand the risk, Emily said. I understood the risk 8 months ago, and I walked away from it, Patricia said. I'm not doing that again. Emily looked at her. There were things she wanted to say, things about what it had meant to be alone with this for 8 months, to carry something this heavy with no one willing to stand beside her. But the words felt too large for the moment, and the clock was still running. Document everything, Emily said. Every result, everything you observed. I'll be in touch within the hour. She picked up her bag and walked out. Marcus was leaning against the vehicle. He looked at her face and opened the door without asking. They drove. Cole had everyone assembled at the garage by the time Emily arrived at 9:15. Everyone except Derek. Cole met her at the door and she followed him to the back room where Tanner was standing over a laptop with a set of earbuds unplugged from the port. Reynolds called Derek at 5:12 this morning, Cole said. Tanner pulled the recording from Derek's phone. Derek's been running a cloned copy to an external server for the last 6 months. He didn't know we'd found the server. He nodded at Tanner, who pressed play. The call was 43 seconds long. Victor Reynolds' voice was calm and deliberate, the voice of a man who measured his words the way other people measured expensive materials. The Carter situation needs to be resolved before it goes further. Harrison has her and he's going to use whatever she has. You know what needs to happen. The meeting this morning, make sure it concludes the way we discussed. Derek's voice. And Harrison becomes a casualty of internal conflict. It's cleaner. Nobody outside asks questions about a biker organization resolving its own problems. A pause. Derek, what about Carter, Victor? She goes with him. The recording ended. The room was very still. Emily had heard a lot of things in the last 8 months that she hadn't expected. She had heard her supervisor tell her she was wrong about something she was unquestionably right about. She had heard a federal compliance officer go silent on the other end of a phone. She had heard the sound of her professional identity being systematically dismantled by people who never once looked her in the face while they did it. But hearing her own name spoken in that voice in the flat administrative tone of someone describing the disposal of something inconvenient did something to her that she hadn't anticipated. It made her furious. Not frightened, furious, clean and focused and completely clarifying. She looked at Cole. He was watching her. You held it together, he said quietly. I've been holding it together for 8 months, she said. He almost nodded. Derek thinks he's walking into a routine meeting. He doesn't know about the recording. He doesn't know about Patricia Shen's analysis. He doesn't know about any of it. When does he arrive? Cole looked at the clock on the wall. He texted Marcus 20 minutes ago. He's on his way. Tanner closed the laptop. What's the play? Cole looked at the room around him, at the men who had ridden with him, worked with him, trusted him with their livelihoods, and in some cases their freedom. At Emily, who had trusted him with the only evidence she had been carrying for 8 months. At the laptop with 43 seconds of audio that undid 15 years in the time it took to play. We let him come in, Cole said. We let him sit down. We let him believe he's in control of this room one more time. He paused. And then we show him exactly what we have. The garage door opened. Derek Lawson walked in. He was dressed the same as any other morning: leather jacket, easy smile, the comfortable bearing of a man who belonged exactly where he was standing. He looked at the assembled men and nodded, looked at Cole and said, "Morning," looked at Emily, and his expression flickered just for a fraction of a second before the easy smile reasserted itself. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said to Emily. "No," Emily said. "I don't imagine you did." Derek looked at Cole. "Big group for a morning meeting." "Sit down, Derek," Cole said. Derek sat. He looked around the room again. Something in the quality of the silence was working on him. Emily could see it in the way his eyes tracked too quickly, checking faces, calculating the smile, staying fixed, because letting it drop would be an admission. Cole pulled a chair out and sat across from him. No table between them. Direct. "Tell me about the Meridian contract," Cole said. Derek's expression didn't change. "What about it? We closed it last night. That's what we were celebrating." "Tell me about the routing." "Financial routing. Marcus handles the pay." "Tell me about the account," Cole said. "The one with the authorization code you pulled from Westbridge's shell network." Something happened in Derek's face. It was small, extremely small. The micro-expression of a man whose internal architecture has just registered a catastrophic structural failure and is trying to prevent it from showing in the outside walls. He recovered in under a second. "I don't know what you're talking about," Derek said. Cole reached into his jacket and put the page from Emily's lockbox on the table between them. The one with the reference number circled in the margin. The one that matched the Meridian routing. Derek looked at it. "Cole, tell me about Reggie Hawthorne," Cole said. This time Derek didn't recover as quickly. His name had hit differently, because Reggie wasn't a financial document. Reggie was a person, a man. They had both known, a man who had been at Cole's table for years, a man whose funeral Derek had attended, and at which he had put his arm around Reggie's wife and told her that Reggie was the best of them. "Reggie died of a heart attack," Derek said. "Yes," Cole said, "he did." The room was absolutely silent. Derek looked at the faces around him, and he understood in the particular way that people understand things they have been trying not to understand, that the room already knew. Not suspected, knew, and that the question Cole was asking was not a question seeking information. It was a question seeking acknowledgement. Derek looked at Cole. Cole looked back at him. And for a moment that stretched out past any comfortable measurement, the 15 years between them sat in the room like a physical presence. When all of it, every road and every risk and every decision made back to back, all of it, now running through the filter of what it had actually been versus what Derek had let Cole believe it was. "How long?" Cole asked. Derek was quiet. "Derek," Cole's voice was very quiet. "How long?" 3 years, Derek said. Several men in the room exhaled, not with surprise, with the grim confirmation of a thing they'd braced for. "Reynolds approached me," Derek said. "He had documentation on something from 2019 that I couldn't have come out. It wasn't." He stopped. "It started as information. He wanted information and I gave it to him, and then it was leverage. And then it was..." He stopped again. "I told myself I was managing it. I told myself it wasn't going to go this far." "But it did," Cole said. "I didn't know about Reggie," Derek said. His voice cracked slightly on the name. "I didn't know they were using it on people. I found out after. I swear to you, I found out after." "But you didn't tell me." Derek said nothing. "You found out that Reggie was killed," Cole said, "using a compound that someone handed our circle's medical information to create. And you didn't tell me." "I was in too deep," Derek said. "I couldn't, there was no way out that didn't..." "There was a way out," Emily said. Every head turned to her. She was looking at Derek with an expression that had nothing vengeful in it. She was past vengeance. She had been past vengeance for months. What she had was something cleaner and harder. "You could have done exactly what I did," she said. "You could have told the truth and lost everything and kept walking." She held his gaze. "It costs something. It costs a lot, but it doesn't cost what you paid." Derek looked at her. And whatever he saw in her face, whatever combination of what she had survived and what she was still standing to say, it did something to him that 3 years of professional maneuvering and careful cover had not done. He put his face in his hands. Nobody in the room moved. Cole stood up. He looked at Tanner. Call our attorney. Right now, Derek is going to give a full statement, everything he knows about Reynolds' operation, every name, every transaction, every compound, every target, on record, documented. He looked at Derek, and Derek is going to do this voluntarily because it is the only path left to him that doesn't lead somewhere much worse. Derek raised his head. Reynolds will come after me, he said, the moment he knows I've talked. Reynolds, Cole said, is no longer your problem to manage. He looked at Emily. Emily pulled out her phone. She called Patricia Shen. Are you documented? She asked. Signed, time-stamped, and backed up to 3 separate locations? Patricia said. I also sent a copy to a law school colleague who runs an independent oversight program. It's already outside my possession. Thank you, Pat. Emily, Patricia's voice was steady. End this. Emily ended the call. She looked at Cole. He looked at her. And in the space between them was 8 months of running and losing and refusing to stop, and 1 night of rain, and a glass she had crossed a room to stop him from drinking, and a list of names with check marks beside them, and 43 seconds of audio, and 1 sealed vial, and the signed analysis of 1 brave woman in a small laboratory in Scottsdale. It was enough. It was exactly enough. Make the call, Emily said. Cole picked up his phone and called the one federal contact he trusted absolutely, a man who had owed him a significant debt for 7 years and who had been waiting without knowing it to repay it in exactly this way. The phone rang twice. I need you to listen very carefully, Cole said when it connected. And then I need you to move very fast. The federal contact's name was Agent David Kowalski, and he picked up on the second ring because Cole Harrison had not called him in 7 years. And the fact that he was calling now meant exactly one thing, that something serious enough to break 7 years of silence had arrived. Cole spoke for 4 minutes without interruption. He covered the compound, the recording, Patricia Shen's analysis, the financial routing, through Westbridge's shell network, the list of 14 names with check marks beside them, and Derek Lawson sitting in the garage ready to give a full statement. He spoke with the compressed precision of someone who understood that every word was either useful or wasted, and he wasted none of them. When he finished, there was a pause. Then Kowalski said, Reynolds has a federal consultation contract. Cole went very still. What kind of pharmaceutical regulatory advisory? It's been in place for 4 years, which means he has access to certain federal databases, certain compliance frameworks, and, Kowalski paused, certain personnel files. Including mine, Emily said from across the room. Cole looked at her. Including hers, he said into the phone. That explains the FDA contact going dark, Emily said. She said it without bitterness, but the flatness in her voice carried everything the bitterness would have. Reynolds didn't just have reach, he had a badge. Kowalski's voice came back measured and careful. This has to be handled correctly or he walks. You understand that? Everything your analyst documented, the chain of evidence on the vial, the recording of the phone call, all of it has to be airtight before we move, or his attorneys tear it apart in 48 hours and he's unreachable for the next decade. How long do you need? Cole asked. Give me 3 hours to get the right people assembled and verify the documentation independently. Don't move on Reynolds before I call you back. Don't let Derek leave your location. Don't, a pause. The woman, Carter, keep her where you can see her. She's not going anywhere, Cole said. Make sure of it. Reynolds is going to figure out the timeline very soon if he hasn't already. When he does, she becomes a liability he'll want to eliminate before she can testify. Cole ended the call and looked around the room. Derek was still sitting where Cole had left him. Elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped in front of him. He had the look of a man whose internal geography had shifted so dramatically that he was still trying to find his footing on ground that no longer matched any map he owned. The easy confidence was gone. What was left underneath it was something older and tireder and considerably more human. Marcus stood by the door. Tanner was on his second cup of coffee, standing in the corner the way he always stood, when he was thinking hard with the particular stillness of someone who could be motionless for long periods without it looking like inaction. Emily sat on the edge of a workbench with her canvas bag beside her and her hands in her lap. She was doing the things she did when she was processing, very still on the outside, everything running fast on the inside. Her eyes focused on the middle distance in a way that wasn't vacancy, but its opposite. "He's going to run," she said. Cole looked at her. "Reynolds." She came back from wherever she'd been thinking. "Kowalski said 3 hours. Reynolds has been running this operation for years, which means he has an exit infrastructure, not an improvised one, a planned one. He's had contingencies built since the beginning." She looked at Cole. If he figures out the timeline before Kowalski moves 3 hours is more than enough time for him to be somewhere that makes him significantly harder to reach. "Then we need to make sure he doesn't figure out the timeline," Cole said. "How?" Cole looked at Derek. Derek raised his head slowly and looked back at him. Something moved in his expression, the recognition of what Cole was about to ask, and the particular weight of being asked it by the person he had most wronged. "You want me to call him?" Derek said. "I want you to call him and tell him the situation at the garage is under control, that I believe the poisoning attempt came from a rival operation, that Emily Carter has been discredited as a mentally unstable former employee who was removed from the premises, that the meeting this morning went the way he needed it to go." Cole held Derek's gaze. "Buy us 3 hours." Derek was quiet for a moment. "If he suspects anything, then you handle it," Cole said. "You've been managing this for 3 years. Manage it one more time, this time for the right side." The words landed without drama. Cole hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't needed to. The precision of it one more time, the right side, did more than anger would have done. Derek reached into his jacket for his phone. His hand was steady. Whatever he was feeling, he had made a decision, and decisions had their own kind of steadying effect on people who had spent too long not making them. He found Victor's number. He looked at Cole once more. Cole nodded. Derek called. Victor picked up on the first ring, which told everyone in the room that Reynolds had been waiting. "Talk to me," Victor said. Derek's voice was even and controlled the tone of a man delivering a routine status update. "It's contained. Harrison thinks the diner situation came from the Sonora crew. There's been tension with them for 2 months and it fits. He's focused on that direction." "And Carter?" "Gone. Marcus removed her from the property this morning. Harrison doesn't trust her. She came in last night with a story and physical evidence. He listened, he checked it, and the evidence wasn't solid enough without proper lab context. She had fragments. Nothing actionable." Derek paused exactly the right length of time. "She's on her own again." A silence. Emily watched Derek's face. She watched how still he held himself, how he kept his breathing measured, how he gave Victor Reynolds exactly the cadence of a man who had nothing to hide because he had given his whole professional life to learning how to sound exactly like that. "The meeting this morning," Victor said, "went fine," Derek said. "Harrison's rattled, but he's looking in the wrong direction. We're clear." Another pause, this one longer. Emily's chest was tight. "All right," Victor said, "stay close to him. I'll be in touch this afternoon." "Copy that," Derek said and ended the call. He lowered the phone. Nobody in the room moved for a full 3 seconds. Then Marcus exhaled. "That man is terrifying." "He was always terrifying," Tanner said quietly. "That was the problem." Derek set the phone on the table in front of Cole. The gesture was deliberate, the physical act of handing something over, of setting down a thing he had been carrying in the wrong direction for 3 years. Cole looked at the phone but didn't pick it up. "He's going to verify," Derek said. "He always verifies. He has eyes in places you don't know about Cole. He'll reach out to someone to confirm my read of this morning's meeting, and whoever that person is, they'll tell him something that either matches or doesn't." "Who's his verification contact inside our operation?" Cole asked. "I don't know," Derek said. "That's the truth. He never told me. He kept his contacts separate from each other. I knew about me. I didn't know about anyone else." Cole looked at Tanner. Tanner already had his phone out. "I'll start running it." "Quietly," Cole said. "Always," Tanner said, and moved to the other side of the garage. Cole turned to Emily. "You said Reynolds has an exit infrastructure." "Yes." "What would it look like?" Emily thought about it, not abstractly, but specifically the way she thought about everything running the actual operational logic. He's been running a covert operation inside a legitimate business for at least 4 years, which means he's been planning for the possibility of exposure since the beginning. He'll have identity documentation, not the obvious kind, not the kind that shows up in standard background checks. He'll have accessible funds and accounts that aren't connected to Westbridge or any of the shell network we've documented. He'll have a destination. She paused. And he'll have a trigger, something that when it hits tells him it's time to go. He won't wait for official action. He'll go when he feels the temperature change. How does he feel the temperature change? Emily hesitated. Then she said something she had been sitting on since Kowalski mentioned the federal consultation contract. He has someone inside Kowalski's network, she said. The room went very quiet. That's how my FDA contact disappeared, she said. That's how my original report was accessed and suppressed before it went anywhere. Reynolds didn't just have external reach. He had someone watching the official channels. She looked at Cole. When Kowalski started making calls to assemble his team, he potentially sent a signal to whoever Reynolds has embedded, which means the 3-hour window may already be shorter than 3 hours. Cole picked up his phone. He called Kowalski back. Kowalski answered on the first ring again. I was about to call you. You have a leak, Cole said. A pause, not a long one, the pause of a man who had suspected something and was hearing it confirmed. What makes you say that? Carter's read of Reynolds' infrastructure. She's been tracking this operation for 8 months, and she knows how he maintains his position. He has someone watching official channels. The moment you started making calls, you may have tripped his trigger. Silence on the line. Then Kowalski said, hold. The sound of movement, a door closing. I made 2 calls before this one, both to people I trust at a professional level. If either of them, he stopped. Give me 10 minutes. You have 5, Cole said. If Reynolds is moving, he's moving now. He ended the call. Emily was already at the workbench with the documents spread in front of her. She was moving through them fast, pulling specific pages, assembling something. What are you doing? Marcus asked. Building the package, she said. If Kowalski's window is compromised and we have to move through a different channel, we need everything organized so that whoever receives it can act on it in under an hour. No context required. Everything self-explanatory. She didn't look up. Patricia's analysis, the vial documentation, the financial routing, the recording, the list of names, the photograph. Every piece connected to every other piece in a logical sequence that a federal prosecutor can follow without having to understand our last 12 hours first. Marcus looked at Cole. Cole looked at Emily working. He had spent 22 years in a world where most people, when they were scared, went one of 2 ways. They froze or they swung. The ones who kept thinking, who kept building, who stayed useful precisely when everything was coming apart at the seams, those people were rare. Cole had met maybe 4 of them in his entire life. He was watching number 5. Help her, he said to Marcus. Marcus went to the table. Tanner came back from the corner of the garage. His face was set in a way that meant he had found something. Talk, Cole said. Reynolds' verification contact, Tanner said. I pulled the communication logs from the server Derek had been feeding. There are messages Derek sent that triggered automatic forwarding to a secondary address. Derek didn't set up the forwarding. Reynolds built it into the server when Derek first started using it. He looked at Derek. You didn't know about it. Derek stared at him. He was reading everything I sent, everything Tanner said, which means he wasn't trusting your reports. He was using your reports as one data stream and cross-referencing them against whatever his secondary contact was feeding him. He looked at Cole. The secondary address traces to a business account registered in Tempe. The account name is a shell, but the server address resolves to... He paused. A law firm, Hargrove and Associates. Emily's hands stopped moving on the documents. She looked up. Hargrove and Associates has a federal practice arm. Yes, Tanner said. They did regulatory compliance work for Westbridge, Emily said. It's in the documents. Their name appears in the Westbridge corporate filings 3 times in the 2-year window I was tracking. She pulled a page from the stack without searching. She knew exactly where it was and handed it to Cole. Westbridge corporate compliance filing. External legal counsel. Hargrove and Associates, Tempe, AZ. Cole called Kowalski. Kowalski picked up in 2 rings this time. Cole, Hargrove and Associates, Cole said. A very long pause. How did you? Is one of the 2 calls you made this morning connected to that firm? Kowalski's voice dropped to something carefully controlled. One of my team members consults regularly with their federal practice arm. It's a standard. He stopped. It's not standard. I should have checked before I called. A pause. Reynolds has been notified. Then he's moving, Cole said. Where would he go? Kowalski's voice had shifted. He was operational now, the professional caution stripped away, moving at the speed the situation demanded. Cole looked at Emily. Emily was already writing on a piece of paper. She slid it across to Cole. He read it, looked up at her. She nodded. He has a property, Cole said into the phone. Not registered to him. It's registered to a trust managed through a Westbridge subsidiary. We have the filing. Small airfield access 20 minutes south of the city. He read out the address from Emily's paper. The sound of Kowalski moving fast. How long ago did the Hargrove contact receive my call? Assuming real-time notification between 45 minutes and an hour, Emily said. Cole related. Then he has a 45-minute head start. Can you cut him off at the airfield? I need to verify the property. David? Cole used the name deliberately. He had never used Kowalski's first name in 7 years of occasional contact. You've been sitting on what you owe me for a long time. I have never once called it in. I'm calling it in right now. Verify on the way. Move. The longest pause of the morning. Then Kowalski said, send me everything Carter built in the last 10 minutes. Emily had a secure transfer link ready before Cole even turned to look at her. She had been building it while he was on the phone, fingers moving across the keyboard of Tanner's laptop with the efficient speed of someone who had worked with evidence documentation long enough that the organizational logic was muscle memory. She hit send. Kowalski's confirmation came back in 40 seconds. I have it. I'm moving. A beat. Tell Carter this is good work. This is very good work. Cole ended the call. He looked at Emily. She was looking at the door. He might still make it to the airfield, she said. It wasn't defeatism. It was the flat assessment of someone who had watched Victor Reynolds outmaneuver everything thrown at him for 8 months and had stopped pretending the outcome was guaranteed. He might, Cole said. And if he does, then Kowalski has the documentation. Patricia has the analysis on record. Derek's statement is going to be recorded in the next 20 minutes. And Victor Reynolds can run to the end of the earth, but every country that has an extradition relationship with the United States has just become a smaller place. He looked at her directly. He's not walking away from this, not from all of it. The only question is whether he spends the next 18 months in a legal process or whether Kowalski reaches him at that airfield in the next 30 minutes. Emily nodded. She sat down. She picked up the photograph from the stack of documents, Victor Reynolds and Derek Lawson outside the Westbridge building, 2 men whose arrangement had cost Reggie Hawthorne his life and 13 other people on a list their families didn't know existed. She looked at it for a moment and then set it face down on the table. She had been carrying that photograph for 8 months. She didn't need to look at it anymore. Derek's attorney arrived at 9:52, a woman named Sandra Okoye, who Cole had used for serious legal matters for 11 years, and who walked into the garage with a recorder, a legal pad, and the expression of someone who had handled difficult situations long enough to greet them without alarm. She sat across from Derek. She looked at him with professional neutrality. You understand that anything you say here is voluntary, she said. You're not under arrest. You are not compelled to speak. But if you choose to speak, what you say will be used as part of a federal evidentiary package. You understand this? Yes, Derek said. And you're choosing to proceed? Yes. Sandra clicked the recorder on. Derek talked for 41 minutes. He talked about the first approach from Victor Reynolds in the 3rd year of the Meridian negotiations, about the leverage Reynolds had used to open the door, about what that leverage was and where it had come from. He talked about the information he had passed, medical records, operational schedules, financial structures, the names of people whose deaths he had later understood were connected to what he had provided. He talked about Reggie Hawthorne in a voice that dropped low and didn't recover its steadiness for several minutes, and Sandra let him take the time without pushing. He talked about the compound, about knowing after the fact what it did and how it worked, and which of the people on the list of 14 he recognized as having received it. He talked about the Meridian contract and how Reynolds had used Derek's access to route the financial infrastructure through Westbridge's shell network without Cole's knowledge. He talked about last night the substitute server, the drink, the plan that was supposed to end with Cole Harrison's death attributed to cardiac arrest in the company of his own men at a celebration dinner. He talked about the message he sent to Reynolds from the diner parking lot. He talked about the 5 a.m. call and what Reynolds had told him to do at the morning meeting. When he stopped, the recorder was still running and the room was very quiet. Sandra clicked it off. She looked at Cole. "This is comprehensive." "Yes," Cole said, "combined with the physical documentation and the laboratory analysis. It closes the case," Emily said from across the room. Not with satisfaction, with the simple assessment of someone who had built things and understood when they were structurally complete. Sandra looked at Emily for the first time with something beyond professional neutrality. "You're Carter." "Yes." "Patricia Shen called me 40 minutes ago," Sandra said. "She wanted to make sure the chain of custody documentation on the vial analysis was legally formatted. We worked through it together." A pause. "She said to tell you the backup copies went to 3 separate locations, including one outside the country." Emily closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "Good." Cole's phone rang. He picked it up, looked at the screen, looked at Emily. "Kowalski." He answered and put it on speaker. "We have him," Kowalski said. "He was 20 minutes from the airfield. Vehicle stop on Route 347. He had documentation cache and a secondary phone with communications we are currently imaging." A pause. He said nothing, didn't resist, just looked at the agent who made the stop and said, "And I'm reading this directly from the field report. I'd like to speak to my attorney." Nobody in the garage cheered. Nobody celebrated. That wasn't the texture of this room, these people, this moment. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose. Tanner set his coffee down. Emily sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the table. Cole said, "And the Hargrove contact." "Being addressed," Kowalski said with a specificity of tone that meant it was being addressed in ways that wouldn't be detailed on an open line. "Cole, the documentation package Carter assembled is exceptional. I want to depose her formally within the next 48 hours while the timeline is clean." "She'll be there," Cole said and looked at Emily for confirmation. She nodded. "One more thing," Kowalski said. "The list, the 14 names." Cole looked at the page, still on the table face up now, check marks beside 7 names, including Reggie Hawthorne's. "What about them?" Cole said. "The ones with check marks. We're going to need to notify families. Some of these cases are going to be reopened. It's not a clean conversation. But they deserve to know." "Yes," Cole said, "they do." He ended the call. The garage was very quiet. Derek was still sitting at the table. He hadn't moved during the call. He had listened to every word, including Kowalski's confirmation, and he sat with it the way a man sits with something he cannot undo but is no longer running from. Cole walked over to him. He stood in front of Derek for a moment. Derek looked up. "Reggie's wife," Derek said. "She needs to hear it from someone who can—" He stopped. "She shouldn't hear it in a formal notification. She shouldn't hear it from a federal agent she's never met." "No," Cole said. "She shouldn't." Derek looked at him with the specific anguish of a man asking for something he has forfeited any clean right to ask for. "I'll go with her," Cole said, "when it's time." Derek put his head down. The sound he made was not something that belonged in the public accounting of what had happened in that garage. It was private and it was real, and nobody in the room commented on it. Emily looked away. She looked at the door of the garage. Outside somewhere, the morning was continuing in traffic, moving people going to work, the ordinary machinery of the world running without any awareness of what had just finished being assembled in a mechanic's garage off a side street in Phoenix, Arizona. She thought about Noah. She had not let herself think about Noah in any sustained way for 8 months because thinking about him meant thinking about how far she had fallen from the person who used to be able to protect him, and that distance had been too painful to look at directly. She had let herself check on him in small ways, a message here, a call from a phone he didn't have the number for, a transfer of what little she could spare from 1 week's wages waiting to an account she had set up in both their names 3 years ago when she was still someone with money to put in accounts. He didn't know most of what she had been through. She had kept it that way deliberately, but he knew enough to be afraid for her, and she had been living for 8 months with the knowledge of his fear as another weight to carry alongside everything else. She was going to call him tonight, from her own phone with her own name, without checking the mirror first. Marcus appeared at her shoulder. "You okay?" She thought about the honest answer. "Not yet," she said, "but I think I'm going to be." Marcus nodded. He had the quality she had noticed of accepting what people told him about themselves without pushing for a different answer, which was a rarer quality than it should have been. Cole came to stand beside her. They stood for a moment without speaking, which had its own kind of language, the language of two people who had been through something compressing and fast and demanding, who had come out the other side, still standing, who needed a moment to simply let the pace slow down. Derek said Reynolds approached him because of leverage from 2019, Emily said. Yes. Do you know what it was? Cole was quiet for a moment. I have an idea. It doesn't change what Derek did, but it explains how Reynolds chose him. He paused. Reynolds didn't pick people randomly. He picked people who were already carrying something they couldn't afford to have surface. He was very good at finding the weight people were trying to hide and using it to make them carry his weight instead. Emily thought about that. He tried to do the same thing to me. How, when he destroyed my reputation, he didn't just get me fired. He circulated a story that I had falsified research data, that I had been removed for professional misconduct, that my findings were the product of an unstable analyst who had a history of obsessive behavior. She said it flatly. He gave me a weight to carry too. He just miscalculated how I'd carry it. Cole looked at her sideways. How did you carry it? I stopped trying to put it down, she said. I just picked it up and walked through every door I could find. Cole looked at her for a moment. When this is finished, he said, when the depositions are done and the case is filed and everything that needs to be documented is documented. What do you want? Emily looked at the door. She thought about this question seriously. She had not been in a position to think about what she wanted for 8 months. Wanting something beyond survival had felt like a luxury she couldn't afford, the kind of forward thinking that belonged to people whose present was stable enough to project from. Her present was finally stable enough. I want to find a way to make sure the next person who discovers something like this doesn't have to go through what I went through to be believed, she said. I want there to be a place they can go that doesn't disappear their report and destroy their career. I want the thing I did to have been the last time someone had to do it that way. She paused. I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. Cole said nothing for a moment. Then, I have 11 legitimate businesses. 4 of them are in regulatory and compliance work, and I have been trying to build something clean for this chapter for 8 years, and I just found out the foundation was undermined before I could finish it, and I'm going to have to rebuild. He looked at the garage around him, at the men who had ridden with him, at the table where the evidence still lay at the door Marcus was guarding, at Tanner running logistics in the corner. I'd like to build it right this time. Emily looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them said what they were both thinking, because some things didn't need to be said yet. Some things needed to wait for the depositions to be done and the legal process to begin and the weight to settle before the shape of what came next could be seen clearly. But it was there, between them. Clear. Sandra Okoye came over with a legal pad and several pages clipped together. I need both of you to review the evidentiary summary before I file it with Kowalski's team, she said. Carter, your formal deposition is scheduled for 10 a.m. Thursday. I'll need 2 hours with you tomorrow to prepare. I'll be there, Emily said. Sandra turned to Cole. And you need to make a decision about the Meridian contract. It's compromised at the financial routing level, but the underlying business arrangement may be salvageable through a restructured channel. Tomorrow, Cole said. Sandra looked at him. There are time-sensitive... Tomorrow, Sandra. She closed her legal pad. She had known Cole Harrison for 11 years, and she recognized the tone. Tomorrow, she agreed and went back to the table. Cole looked at Emily one more time. Go call your brother, he said. Emily looked at him. She hadn't told him about Noah. She hadn't mentioned him since the diner. Cole read her expression. Marcus told me, the photograph in your wallet. He paused. He looks like you. Emily picked up her phone. She walked to the far end of the garage, away from the noise of Sandra reviewing documents and Tanner running searches and Marcus monitoring the door. She found Noah's number. The real one. The one she had stopped using 8 months ago because calling it felt like pulling him into a danger she couldn't protect him from. She pressed call. It rang once. Emily? Noah's voice came through the line with 8 months of relief compressed into 2 syllables, and she understood in that moment how much weight 2 syllables could carry. Hey, she said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. I'm okay. I'm actually okay. She heard him exhale. I have a lot to tell you, she said. But first I just wanted you to hear my voice. Yeah, Noah said. Yeah, me too. She stood at the far end of the garage with her back to the room and talked to her brother for the first time in 8 months. And outside the day was moving toward noon, and in a processing facility south of Phoenix, a man named Victor Reynolds was sitting across a table from a federal agent and beginning to understand the full dimensions of what had just closed around him. And in 11 legal businesses across Arizona, the foundation of something new was waiting to be built. The deposition took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Emily sat across from 2 federal prosecutors and a court reporter in a conference room at Sandra Okoye's law office and answered every question with the same quality of precision she had brought to 8 years of laboratory work, detailed, sequenced, grounded in specific, observable facts rather than interpretation. She had learned early in her career that the most dangerous thing an analyst could do was mistake their conclusion for their evidence. Evidence was what you could demonstrate. Everything else was argument. She gave them evidence. When it was over, the lead prosecutor, a woman named Rachel Dunn, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had the kind of focused intelligence that filled a room without effort, took off her glasses and looked at Emily across the table. In 21 years of federal prosecution, Dunn said, "I have seen maybe 3 civilians present evidentiary packages at this level of organization." Emily looked at her. "Is that relevant to the case?" Dunn almost smiled. "No, I just wanted you to know." Emily nodded once and picked up her bag. She was halfway to the door when Dunn said, "The Hargrove contact, the attorney who fed Reynolds information from our side. His name is going to come out in discovery within the next 2 weeks. There are going to be people inside the federal system who are not happy about how far Reynolds' reach extended, and some of those people are going to look for someone to be unhappy at." Emily stopped. "Are you warning me about something?" "I'm telling you to stay available and stay visible," Dunn said. "You've been living under the radar for 8 months out of necessity. That necessity is over. The more visible you are, the harder it is for anyone to quietly inconvenience you." Emily turned back to look at her. "Quietly inconvenience me." "Reynolds had a method," Dunn said. "He didn't eliminate people. He made them disappear professionally, socially, credibility-wise. He's in custody. His operation is dismantled. But operations like his don't exist in isolation. They have adjacent relationships, people who benefited without being formally involved." She held Emily's gaze. "Stay visible." Emily stood in the doorway for a moment. "Thank you," she said. She walked out into the corridor where Marcus was waiting in a chair with a cup of coffee he'd clearly gotten from somewhere down the street because it had a logo on it that didn't belong to the building. He stood up when he saw her face. "How bad?" he asked. "Not bad," she said. "Long." He handed her the coffee. She took it. They rode back to the garage in the comfortable silence that had become, over the last 48 hours, their natural register with each other. Marcus had a quality she had identified on the first night, the quality of a man who understood that presence was sometimes more valuable than conversation, and who had decided at some point in his life to become very good at being present without filling the space with noise. "Cole wants to meet this afternoon," Marcus said. "I know, he texted me." She looked out the window. "Did he go to see Reggie's wife?" "This morning he took Tanner with him." A pause. "He was there for 2 hours." Emily looked at her coffee. She thought about Reggie Hawthorne's wife, a woman she had never met, who had spent 8 months grieving a death that had been designed to look like something it wasn't, who had said goodbye to her husband, believing his heart had simply failed. The particular violence of that, not just the death, but the false story wrapped around it, was something Emily had been carrying since she first saw Reggie's name on the list with the check mark beside it. She hoped Cole had found the right words. She suspected he had. He was a man who understood that some things could only be said directly, and that the attempt to soften the unsoftenable was its own kind of disrespect. "How is he?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Cole doesn't show it the way other people show it, but he's been riding with these men for 22 years. Reggie was at his table for 14 of them. Reggie's kids call him Uncle Cole." He kept his eyes on the road. "He's carrying it. He'll keep carrying it. That's what he does." Emily nodded. She understood that kind of carrying. The meeting that afternoon was smaller than the morning gathering. Cole, Marcus, Tanner, Sandra, and Emily sitting at the workbench in the garage with the documents cleared away and coffee and paper cups in the particular quality of quiet that settles into a space after the urgent noises passed. Cole had called the meeting to talk about the Meridian contract. Sandra laid out the legal landscape in her direct economical way. The contract itself was valid. The underlying business arrangement was sound, but the financial routing Derek had used to channel it through Westbridge's network had contaminated the documentation trail in ways that needed to be surgically addressed before the contract could be executed cleanly. How long? Cole asked. 6 to 8 weeks to restructure the routing and file amended documentation, Sandra said. The Meridian side is willing to hold. I spoke to their counsel this morning. They want the deal. They're not walking away over a restructuring timeline. Good. Cole looked at the table for a moment. What else? The federal case against Reynolds moves to arraignment within 30 days. Derek's cooperation agreement is being finalized. He'll receive a reduced charge in exchange for full testimony. His attorney and Dunn's team are in negotiation. Sandra looked at her notes. The 14 names on the list Dunn's office is coordinating with local medical examiners in the relevant jurisdictions to reopen the flagged cases. 7 of them are almost certain to be reclassified based on the compound analysis Patricia Shen provided. 7 families. 7 conversations like the one Cole had sat through this morning with Reggie's wife. The room absorbed that quietly. Patricia Shen, Cole said, looking at Emily. She's been formally engaged by Dunn's office as an expert witness, Emily said. Her professional profile is going to be rebuilt in the public record through the case proceedings. By the time the trial is over, her credentials will be stronger than they were before Reynolds dismantled her department. And yours? Cole asked. Emily looked at him. This was the question she had been sitting with since the deposition. Her professional record had been systematically dismantled. False misconduct allegations, fabricated data, falsification, claims, an entire constructed narrative designed to make her not just unemployed, but unhireable, not just discredited, but radioactive in any professional context adjacent to pharmaceutical research. Rebuilding that was not a simple matter of a court case resolving in her favor. Dunn says the false record will be formally corrected through the federal proceedings, Emily said. Reynolds' people created documentation to support the misconduct allegations. When that documentation is exposed as fabricated in a federal trial, my professional record gets corrected retroactively. She paused. But retroactive correction doesn't mean the industry remembers it differently overnight. The people who made decisions based on that false record, they knew what they knew when they knew it. Some of them will update their position. Some of them won't. So what do you do? Tanner asked. Emily looked at the table. She'd been thinking about what she'd said to Cole the morning after about wanting to build something that meant the next person didn't have to do it alone. She had been thinking about it since then, turning it over, testing its edges, checking whether it was a real idea or just the kind of thing you said in the aftermath of something difficult. It was a real idea. I want to set up an independent oversight organization, she said. Not government, not corporate. A private structure that accepts and investigates pharmaceutical safety disclosures from analysts, researchers, technicians, anyone inside the industry who finds something they can't report through official channels without risk of the kind of retaliation I experienced. She looked at Cole. I know how to build it. I know what it needs to function. I know every gap in the current system that Reynolds used to make that system useless against him. She paused. What I don't have is the infrastructure to start it. Cole was looking at her with those storm cloud eyes. I have 11 businesses, he said. I know. 3 of them operate in compliance and regulatory consulting. I know that too. And I told you the other morning that I needed to rebuild the foundation of what I'm doing here, he said. Clean, right? Yes. What you're describing, Cole said carefully, is the kind of thing that would require significant separation from any of my existing operations in terms of public profile. Emily nodded. It has to be structurally independent. Publicly, the credibility of the organization depends on it not being connected in any visible way to interests that could create a perception of bias. She met his gaze. But it can be funded through a private trust without that trust being publicly named. The organization operates independently. The funding source stays private. Sandra can structure it. Sandra, who had been listening without expression for the last several minutes, said, yes, she can. Cole looked at Sandra. Sandra looked back at him with the specific professional neutrality that meant I have reviewed this internally and I am not raising an objection. Cole looked back at Emily. What do you call it? He asked. Emily had been thinking about the name since before she was conscious of thinking about it, since somewhere in the deposition when Rachel Dunn had said the word visible, and something had clicked into place. "The Clearline Institute," she said, "because the problem isn't that people don't find the truth. The problem is that every path from the truth to the people who would act on it gets deliberately obstructed. Clearline means clearing the path." The room was quiet. Tanner said, "I like it." Marcus said, "Yeah." Cole said, "When do you want to start?" 3 weeks later, Emily Carter signed the founding documents for the Clearline Institute at Sandra Okoye's office. Patricia Shen was there. Noah Carter was there. He had driven from Tucson, where he had been finishing his second year of nursing school, and when he walked into Sandra's office and saw Emily standing next to a table covered in legal documents, looking more like herself than she had in a year, he crossed the room in 4 steps and held on to her for a long moment, without saying anything, because some reunions didn't need an opening line. Marcus was there. Cole was there. He stood slightly apart from the table in the way he always stood in rooms he hadn't organized himself, present, but not presiding, watching rather than directing, giving the moment the shape it needed rather than the shape he could have imposed on it. Emily signed her name at the bottom of the founding documents. She set down the pen. She looked at the signature for a moment. Emily Carter, her name, her handwriting on a document that said she was the founding director of something real and permanent and built for the right reasons. 8 months ago, she had been sleeping in a motel with $300 and a lockbox of documents that nobody would look at. She picked up the pen again and handed it to Patricia. Patricia signed as co-founder and chief scientific officer. Noah signed as a witness. Sandra notarized. When it was done, Cole walked over to the table and looked at the documents. "Congratulations, Director Carter," he said. Emily looked at him. "It's a long way from the Lucky Spoon Diner," she said. 22 days, he said. "Not that long." "It feels long." "Most things that matter do," he said. The Victor Reynolds trial began 11 weeks after his arrest. It lasted 23 days. Emily testified for 2 full days. She sat in the witness chair and answered questions from Rachel Dunn and cross-examination from Reynolds' defense team with the same qualities she had brought to the deposition: clear, specific, grounded, unmovable. The defense tried 3 separate angles to suggest her testimony was motivated by personal grievance, professional embarrassment, and what one of Reynolds' attorneys actually described in open court as an obsessive pattern of targeting. Rachel Dunn's redirect examination took 45 minutes and dismantled each angle with a precision that the court reporter would later describe to a colleague as surgical. Emily didn't look at Reynolds during her testimony, not once. Not because she was afraid of him or affected by his presence, but because he had occupied enough of her attention for enough of her life, and the truth she was delivering to the court didn't require his acknowledgement to be true. It was true regardless of where she looked. Patricia Shen testified for a full day and a half on the chemical analysis. Derek Lawson testified for 3 days. His testimony was the most damaging. He knew everything: the architecture of the operation, the targeting methodology, the specific cases, the financial structures, the network of embedded contacts Reynolds had built across regulatory and federal frameworks over a decade. He delivered it in the flat, factual voice of a man who had stopped managing how things looked and was simply saying what was true. Reynolds sat through all of it without visible reaction. He was a man who had built his entire professional existence on controlling information and the perception of information. Watching that control stripped away in public piece by piece, day by day, was its own form of consequence, and one Emily suspected he felt more acutely than anything else that was happening to him. On the 23rd day, the jury went out. They came back in 6 hours and 40 minutes. Guilty on 14 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty on 22 counts of fraud. Guilty on 8 counts of corruption of federal officials. Guilty on 11 counts related to the development and deployment of an unlicensed biological compound for the purpose of unlawful homicide. Emily was sitting in the 3rd row when the verdicts were read. Noah was beside her. Patricia was on the other side. When the last guilty verdict was read, the courtroom moved the sound of families who had come for answers, hearing the word they had been owed, some of them crying, some of them very still, some of them doing both at once. Reggie Hawthorne's wife, whose name was Carolyn, and who had become someone Emily knew over the course of the trial and the way people become known to each other through shared weight, sat 2 rows ahead and put her hand over her mouth and held it there for a long time. Emily watched her. She felt Noah reach over and squeeze her hand. She held on to it. She did not cry in the courtroom. She had done her crying in the months before this in cheap motels and shelter bathrooms and parking lots where nobody could see her. She had used up that particular reservoir in private, which meant she could sit in that courtroom with Carolyn Hawthorne, 2 rows ahead, and feel exactly what this moment was without needing to perform it. Justice was not restoration. She knew that 7 people on that list were still dead and a verdict didn't bring them back. And the families sitting in that courtroom would carry the specific grief of knowing their person had been deliberately taken for the rest of their lives. The verdict said that what happened was real and that it was wrong and that the person who did it had been held to account. That was meaningful. It was not enough. It was also the most the law could do, and Emily had spent enough time watching the law fail to feel the weight of what it meant when it worked. She let Noah's hand go after a while. She stood up. Outside the courthouse, Rachel Dunn shook Emily's hand and said, "Clearline is going to do important work." "That's the plan," Emily said. "I'm going to have 3 cases on your desk within the month," Dunn said. "People who've been sitting on disclosures because they had nowhere safe to take them." "Send them," Emily said. 6 months after the verdict, the Clearline Institute had a staff of 7, a formal intake process, and 4 active cases. The first came from a technician at a medical device company in Minneapolis who had discovered a firmware flaw in a cardiac monitoring system that had been flagged internally and buried by a compliance officer with ties to the company's largest investor. Emily's team documented the flaw, secured the technical evidence, connected the technician with legal representation, and filed a formal disclosure with the FD through a verified protected channel that bypassed the 3 compromised contacts Reynolds' network had left behind. The device was recalled. Nobody died from it. That was the thing about stopping something before it became a disaster. There was no dramatic headline. There was no story. There was just a flaw that got fixed, a system that worked the way it was supposed to work, and a technician in Minneapolis who could go to work on Monday morning without looking over his shoulder. Emily thought that was the best possible outcome. The second case was a research chemist in Georgia who had documented a supply chain manipulation that was allowing a contaminated pharmaceutical precursor to enter the production line of a generic medication taken by roughly 200,000 people with diabetes. The chemist had been told by 3 levels of management that her findings were within acceptable parameters. She had been told this once in writing, which gave Clearline's legal team exactly the document they needed to establish that the organization had known. The contamination was addressed before anyone was harmed. Again, no headline. Just people who didn't get hurt. Emily was beginning to think that invisibility was in fact the correct measure of success in her field. The third case was more complicated and took longer and involved a legal process that ran parallel to a regulatory investigation and required Patricia Shen to fly to Washington twice to consult with a Senate subcommittee. Emily didn't talk about that one publicly. Some things were still moving, and she had learned the value of patience with moving things. The fourth case arrived on a Tuesday morning in the form of a phone call from a man who spoke quietly and had the particular careful cadence of someone who had been holding something in for a long time and was still deciding, even as he called, whether he could afford to let it out. Emily listened to him for 22 minutes without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "You're not alone in this anymore. Do you understand me? You found the right place to bring this. We're going to help you." The man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I wasn't sure anyone would." "I know," Emily said. "I know exactly what that feels like. But you called, and that's the part that matters." She spent the next 2 hours building the intake documentation on his case. She was still working on it in the early afternoon when her phone buzzed with a text from Cole. "Lucky Spoon, 7 o'clock, same table." She put the phone face down and kept working for another hour. Then she saved the file, backed it up to 3 locations out of habit, put on her jacket, and told her assistant she was leaving for the day. The Lucky Spoon Diner had been under new management for 4 months. The previous owner had retired, which was the kind of thing that happened when the building you operated became peripherally associated with a federal prosecution that made national news. The new owners had repainted the exterior and added a specials board and kept everything else the same, which was the right call. The diner had good bones and the food had always been decent, and the rain-beaten regularity of it was exactly the kind of thing that Phoenix didn't have enough of. Emily arrived at 6:58. Cole was already there. He was at the back corner table, the same one where his celebration had been interrupted 22 weeks ago, with 2 cups of coffee and no particular expression on his face, which was his default setting in any situation he wasn't actively managing. Emily sat down across from him. He pushed 1 cup toward her. She took it. They sat for a moment without speaking, which had its own grammar, now a shared shorthand built from the compressed intensity of what they had been through together and the quieter, slower months that had come after it. Carolyn Hawthorne called me this morning, Cole said. Emily looked up. She wants to set up the scholarship in Reggie's name, Cole said, for young mechanics. He always said the industry needed more people who understood engines from the ground up and not from a computer screen. A pause. She asked if I'd be on the board. What did you tell her? I said yes. Emily nodded. How's the institute? Cole asked. Growing, Emily said. Rachel Dunn wasn't exaggerating about the backlog. There are people who've been sitting on disclosures for months, some for years, because the official channels felt too dangerous and they had nowhere else to go. She held the coffee cup. We're not going to fix the whole system, but we can clear the path for the people who are brave enough to walk it. Cole looked at her. You sound like someone who's been giving speeches. I gave 3 last month. She said it without self-consciousness. A pharmaceutical industry conference, a federal oversight symposium, and a law school in Phoenix. She paused. I was terrified for the first one. The second one was easier. The third one I actually think went well. What do you talk about? What it costs to tell the truth, Emily said. What the system does to people who try, and what has to change so that the cost isn't the first thing those people have to calculate. She set her cup down. I talk about what happened to me. I talk about what happened to Reggie and the others on that list. I talk about what Clearline is trying to build. She paused. And I talk about a diner in Phoenix and a glass of whiskey that didn't get drunk. Cole looked at her. You use it, he said. It's the best opening I have, she said. It's true, and it's specific, and it tells people immediately that the system can fail at the most fundamental level. Someone designed an invisible weapon and put it in a man's drink, and the only reason he's alive is because a broke, scared, exhausted chemical analyst who had lost everything she'd worked for still couldn't walk past a wrongdoing without doing something about it. She held his gaze. I use it because it's true. And because the people in those rooms need to understand that the only thing standing between the system working and the system failing is one person who refused to stay quiet even when staying quiet was clearly the safer choice. Cole was quiet for a moment. You were terrified, he said. I was completely terrified. And she said, the whole time, I'm not sure I've ever been that afraid in my life. But you came in anyway. I couldn't not, she said. That's the honest answer. It wasn't courage in the way courage is supposed to look. It was just I couldn't make myself not go in. I saw what was happening, and my feet were already moving. She looked at her coffee. I think most people who do something like that would tell you the same thing. It's not that they decided to be brave, it's that the alternative required them to be someone they didn't recognize. Cole nodded slowly. Noah, he said. How is he? Emily's expression did something that didn't quite reach a smile but was in the same neighborhood. He finishes nursing school in June. He wants to specialize in cardiac care. She paused. He says it's because of what happened. He wants to be in the room where the things that go wrong with hearts get caught and corrected. Cole picked up his coffee. That's a good reason, he said. He's a good person, Emily said. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, Phoenix was moving through its early evening in the way cities move, dense and indifferent and continuous, the noise of it pressing gently against the diner's windows. Emily looked at the table between them, at the 2 coffee cups, at the ordinary surface of a Tuesday evening in a diner that had seen something extraordinary and absorbed it the way places absorb things quietly without changing its floor plan. Cole, she said. He looked at her. The night in the storage unit, she said. When you matched the account number to the Meridian routing, you already knew something was wrong with the deal. You said there were things that didn't track. Yes. How long had you known? He looked at his cup. 6 weeks. Emily looked at him. You suspected Derek for 6 weeks. I suspected something for 6 weeks, Cole said. I didn't have enough to be certain, and Derek had been with me for 15 years, and being certain matters before you act on something like that. He paused. And I was wrong to wait. Reggie died 11 weeks before I started suspecting. He said that last sentence with a particular stillness and that told her it was something he had said to himself many times and was not finished saying. You couldn't have known about the compound, Emily said. No. Or what Reynolds was doing with the information that Eric gave him. No, he said again. Then the 11 weeks before you started suspecting, don't do that, Cole said quietly. Emily stopped. He looked at her directly. Don't work backward from the outcome and tell me the parts I couldn't have controlled. I know the parts I couldn't have controlled. The part I carry is the part I can't resolve cleanly, and I've made my peace with carrying it. He held her gaze. Some weight doesn't get put down. It just gets distributed across enough purpose that you can keep walking. Emily looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the list of 14 names, the 7 with check marks, the 7 without the ones who had been targeted but not yet reached when the operation was dismantled. She thought about the technician in Minneapolis and the chemist in Georgia and the man who had called that morning and said he wasn't sure anyone would listen. She thought about what it meant that they had. Distributed across enough purpose, she said. Yes, I think that's the best description of what we're both doing that I've heard. Cole almost smiled. It was the same almost smile she had first seen across a room full of armed men 22 weeks ago, the expression of a man who had too much control over his face to let an actual smile happen easily, but who got close to it when something landed in the right place. How's the chapter? Emily asked. Rebuilding, Cole said. Honest money is slower than the other kind, but it stays built. He looked at his cup. We have 32 men. Every one of them knows what happened and why and what we're building toward. I told them directly, no summary, no management of the information, just the truth. A pause. Most of them already suspected something was wrong. People close to a situation usually do. They were waiting for someone to say it out loud. How did they respond? The way you respond when someone finally says out loud the thing you've been carrying in private, Cole said. With relief, even when the thing is terrible. Emily nodded. She understood that. She had spent 8 months in the wrong kind of alone, not the alone of solitude which she could have tolerated, but the alone of being the only person in possession of a true truth that other people's lives depended on and that no one was willing to look at. The moment Cole had said, show me across a room full of guns, the alone had ended. Not the difficulty had run for weeks after that. But the alone had ended in that specific second, and she hadn't fully understood how much it had been costing her until it stopped. Derek's sentencing is in 3 weeks, Cole said. I know. Are you going? Emily thought about it. I don't know yet. I don't have unfinished business there, but Carolyn Hawthorne is going, and Patricia is going, and I think... She paused. I think there's something about being present for the legal completion of it. Not for Reynolds, for the people who came all the way to the end of this with us. Cole nodded. I'll be there. Then probably I will too. She picked up her coffee cup. Cole picked up his. They were quiet for a moment in the way 2 people are quiet when they have said the things that needed saying, and what remains doesn't need words. The shared awareness of where they had started and what the distance between that starting point and this table represented in cost and weight and change. Emily thought about the night she had walked into this diner with rain in her hair and everything she owned in a canvas bag and a piece of knowledge that had been burning a hole in her for 8 months. She thought about the moment she had shouted across the room and felt the air change. She thought about 4 guns and a vice president's calculating smile and a glass of whiskey. That a frightened, exhausted, broke woman in worn boots had stopped a man from drinking through sheer refusal to be someone who walked past a wrongdoing. She could have stopped. She thought about Noah finishing nursing school in June. She thought about the man on the phone that morning, holding something he'd been afraid to say out loud, choosing to say it to someone who would actually listen. She thought about 7 families who now knew the truth of what had happened, and 7 others who were still alive to have families because an operation built to make death look natural had been dismantled before it could reach them. She thought about Cole Harrison, the most feared man in Arizona, who had looked at a terrified woman he didn't know and said, show me, and meant it, and acted on what she showed him with a directness and a completeness that had closed the loop on something that might otherwise have run for years more. She thought about what Dunn had said. Stay visible. She intended to. She set her coffee cup down. She looked across the table at Cole. Thank you, she said. He looked at her. For what specifically? For lowering the glass. He said. He held her gaze for a moment. Outside, the evening was settling over Phoenix. The way evenings settle gradually, then completely, the light changing in the incremental way. That means you can't point to the exact moment it shifted, only to the fact that it has. The diner's windows held the last of it warm and ordinary, and entirely indifferent to the weight of what had happened at this particular table 22 weeks ago. Cole Harrison set his coffee down. He looked at the woman across from him who had walked through 8 months of professional destruction, public erasure, financial collapse, and deliberate isolation without surrendering the truth she carried or the instinct that had driven her to carry it. "You're the bravest person I've met in 22 years, he said. "And I've met some exceptional people." Emily looked at him without deflecting it. She had spent 8 months being told in various explicit and implicit ways that she was unstable, unreliable, obsessive, and wrong. She had spent 8 months absorbing a constructed version of herself that bore no resemblance to the person she actually was. And she had carried the real version of herself through all of it by sheer force of not letting the constructed version replace it. She was done deflecting the true things. "I know," she said simply. Cole looked at her, and then he did something she had not seen him do in 22 weeks of knowing him. He laughed. It was brief and genuine and completely unguarded, and it changed his face entirely stripped away. 22 years of command and consequence, and left something younger and simpler, underneath something that had clearly always been there but rarely got to surface. Emily smiled, really smiled, the kind that reached everything. Outside, Phoenix finished its shift into evening. Inside the Lucky Spoon diner, at the same back corner table where a celebration had been interrupted by a woman who could not make herself stay quiet, two people who had found each other at the worst possible moment sat with their coffee and their shared history and the quiet, durable knowledge of what they had built from it. One person's courage had changed the fate of many. One person's refusal to walk past a wrongdoing had unraveled a network of invisible murder, restored the truth to 7 families protected. 7 others who would never know how close they had come, and built a structure designed to make sure the next person who found something terrible had somewhere real to take it. And the woman who had done all of that, who had carried the truth through everything it cost her and crossed a room full of guns to make it matter, sat in the diner where it began and let the weight she had been carrying for 8 months finally completely and permanently settle into the foundation of everything she was building with it. She had walked in with nothing. She left with everything that was worth keeping. And the truth she had refused to abandon had done exactly what truth does. When it is carried far enough by someone brave enough to carry it, it had outlasted every effort to silence it, and it had won.